Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the briefing room. I'm your host, Abu Hamza, and with me is my co-host, Samira Ahmed. Samira, what do you have for us today?
Assalamu alaikum. Now, as you all know, in September this year, the international community attended the New Deal for Somalia conference led by the European Union. Now, many of the nations endorsed the 3-year plan to establish Somalia as a functioning state and had pledged to invest over 1.8 billion euros into helping rebuild the country. Now, as the host of the conference, the European Union was the largest single donor to Somalia and pledged 650 million euros. Now, the money pledged in September would be spent according to a plan drawn up by the Somali federal government with international assistance. However, several months later, the Somali Deputy Prime Minister, Fosia Yusuf Adam, isn't too impressed to say the least. According to IB Times, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Deputy PM said that the Somali nation had received nothing from the European Union, only promises. This naturally has caused tensions diplomatically between Somalia and the European Union. Now, the EU Commissioner for Development, Andres Piebalgs, who states that this accusation is absolutely false, goes on to say, "We have a substantial development project in parts of Somalia. We dispersed nearly 50 million euros, and the biggest part goes to areas such as Somaliland, Puntland, in education, rural development, healthcare, and access to water. Lots of money is being invested." But does Deputy PM have a point? Although aid is not the overall solution to Somalia's crippled state, the European Union clearly has stated that the Somali federal government has not and will not see any pledged donations until an accountable public finance management system is in place. The Commissioner went on to say, "I pledge to work with the government as close as I can, and I will honour it. We bring very substantial support to Somalia, although we don't channel any money through the government." Now, that's quite interesting. So the 1.8 billion euro question is, where is the money being channeled? Hamza?
Now, this is exactly what they were saying before. They were saying that they channel it to areas of Somaliland and to Puntland, and especially in such areas such as rural development, education projects, access to water. But you think, how will the Somali federal government be able to rebuild itself and rebuild its institution if nothing is being directly funneled towards it? Now, I appreciate there isn't too much trust or faith in their public finance management systems. Over the last year or so, we have seen 2 central bank governors resign amidst allegations of some sort of corruption happening within the systems and obviously with the government itself. So you think to yourself, okay, if all that is happening, then surely it's of no fault of any of the international donors to not give money directly. They'd rather give money to either the NGOs or to other administrations or other areas of the actual Somali Peninsula. And even though it's a fair point to do that, I still think it's quite wrong, because I think to myself, okay, whilst you're doing that, if you have pledged money, then you should be able to give it. I appreciate, yes, they need to show a track record of successful public finance management. But how do you expect a government to rebuild its institutions, to rebuild itself, if they're not going to get any actual money? They have other avenues of getting money. They've recently obviously published their new budget, and some of that will come from tax, but a lot of it obviously will come from the pledges made by all these international donors. And with that, you have to think to yourself, okay, they need that money to be able to rebuild those institutions. But if they're not getting it, where will they go? So she had a point. She had a point. She probably could have said it a little bit better. It probably wasn't the best diplomatic statement that could have been made in that sense. But aside from that, there's a point there. Whilst the EU Commissioner is being quite diplomatic and saying, yes, we do give money, in his diplomatic statement, he still kind of pointed out that, yeah, no, we don't give them any money.
I mean, there are 2 things here for me personally. First of all, as the Deputy Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, you're responsible of the image of the Somali people at the end of the day. Everybody is very, well-tuned and understands the issues that are going on within the country. But, making a statement that kind of reinforces this negative image of Somalis as, kind of begging for money, running around, wanting assistance, that are too dependent on aid is not really benefiting us. So I believe that the message could have been delivered a lot better, even though, she does have the right to make these statements. If money has been pledged, like you said, it should be delivered to the people. But secondly, for me, I think it's a little bit silly. If this money has been pledged to rebuild the government, then surely you have some sort of, the European Union has some sort of responsibility in ensuring that the public management, finance and management system is put in place. So it's not only about pledging money, but it's about training the professionals there and the students coming up to ensure that they have qualified and competent people in that system that, will avoid corruption and will be able to deliver that money to the people that need it the most.
But how do you put those two together? Because on one side, yes, it's good that they should train them and they should be able to be responsible for setting up some sort of public financial management system. But at the same time, what part of the responsibility lies with the Somalis themselves? And there are so many Somali people who are now trying to obviously argue for nothing should be done by anyone else. The Somalis should be doing everything else themselves, and other people should be supporting them doing it. So if they are going to come in and set up a structure or a framework, then does this not mean that it's been taken out of the Somali people's hands?
Well, not necessarily. I think we have to be really practical. Now, myself, I'm not really necessarily the biggest fan of aid. I would want to see a independent Somali government who are able to do things on their own. But, we've been without any infrastructure for over 20 years, so it's not going to be an easy road. Rome wasn't built in a day. Somalia is not going to be rebuilt over a few months. It's going to take a number of years, perhaps decades, before it gets back to its former glory. So with that said, we do need the support of the international community, but we just need to ensure that we're not being cheated, first of all. I mean, something like 500 million euros is being spent on supporting AMISOM. Where else could that money be going?
A lot of places, and should they be really taking the support from the international donors? Sometimes I think to myself, if there was a little bit more collaboration between Somalia and Somaliland and Djibouti, for example, and Puntland, Somaliland, Puntland and Djibouti have, for a while now, have put in some form of a robust financial infrastructure where they are able to handle quite large amounts of money and be able to distribute it and for it to be accountable and to be to some form, obviously transparent. So instead of going towards the international donors for this kind of support or some sort of framework or foundation, why don't they go to the administrations of Somaliland, Puntland and Djibouti to say, okay, listen, can you guys show us what you guys have done? We can take that model, we'll try to obviously apply it in a certain way that suits us, and then in that way they can take that on board and try to figure that out. I mean, anytime we need help, we seem to be going towards the international donors, the non-Somali donors, or the non-Somali countries, whereas we have other Somalis who can really help with this. So perhaps it would be an idea for us to be able to go towards them.
That's right, and inshallah we'll get over this internal animosity that we have within each other and start looking more inwards for our own solutions, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Okay, now moving on, another one of this week's biggest headlines is that Kenya has signed an agreement with the UN Refugee Agency to repatriate 500,000 Somali refugees back to their location of origin. Now, this is something that I'm really concerned about, actually, because obviously these refugees have been in places like Dadaab for maybe 10, 15, 20 years. Where is home? Does home still exist? Where will they be returned back to?
Now, this is the thing. They're going to be returned back to areas that have been liberated, they say, from Al-Shabaab. So basically areas that they deem is going to be safe. Now, if they say, yes, fine, we're going to be able to do this over a 3-year period, and within this time period, obviously, it's only the ones that are willing to go back. It's the ones that say, okay, it's supposed to be a voluntary repatriation. So those that are not willing to return obviously won't be forcefully returned because it's against international legislation, international law. But they're going to be returned to areas which is sort of close to Kismayo and just sort of the outskirts of Mogadishu. But I think to myself, there is a concern, because the concern is that they are already having difficulty managing and dealing with the internally displaced people. So if you have over 1 million people who are displaced internally and you're unable to provide the right type of security, accommodations or housing, shelter and food and clean water for them, then how are you going to handle the influx of the refugees who have been outside of the country for so many years and handle taking care of them? And it's not just in Kenya. I mean, because of this, they made an agreement here. They're also trying to make agreements with Djibouti and Ethiopia and Yemen. And I think to myself, okay, you want to get all the refugees that are in all those countries back as well. And I appreciate this needs to be done. It needs to be done because Somalis ultimately want to be able to return home. We need the resources, and we don't want to be able to put a burden on other countries unnecessarily. But at the same time, you have to then ask yourselves, you can't do anything half-heartedly. If you're unable to do this, if they are better off, no matter how bad the situation is, if they are better off where they are, as bad as it is there, then it would be when you return them back. What's the point of returning them back just for the sake of having them, if you're unable to provide them with a better alternative? So this to me is a little bit too early. It's a little bit too early, and it's premature because they don't have the right resources yet to be able to take this on. They can't take on this job.
But at the same time, the Somali ambassador to Kenya, Mohammed Ali Noor, has also called for calm. There are a lot of rumours going around within refugee camps that this will be some sort of a forced repatriation. But when, of course, this is still going to be a voluntary choice. So people will have the choice if they want to return back and participate in this scheme. But at the same time, like you said, if they're not really going to be going back to a better alternative, is it really the same time for the move? But we have to consider the strain on the Kenyan government. I know a lot of the times we don't want to think about this, but they are really eager to kind of move these refugees on. And maybe it's not really the best, well thought out process. Perhaps we do need more time, some consultation, and really come up with some sort of a phased program for moving these refugees back. But I'd like to see the Somali government step up a little in their planning of this and really ensuring the safety of the people they should be responsible for.
Yeah, but the thing is, I appreciate this is a strain and a burden on other countries, Kenya included, but they are getting quite a lot of money for this at the same time. So aside from being able to provide this money towards the refugees, they are also financially benefiting from it. But that's not the case. The case is, the reason why this is being expedited is because the Interior Secretary Minister, Joseph Odolenko, was saying that basically he blames the Westgate attack on those who were on the Dadaab, because apparently, according to his sources, this was planned in the Dadaab and in these refugee camps. And he says basically these camps are places and areas where refugees or where people pretend to be refugees, or they aren't actually refugees, and then they are planning these terrorist attacks. So the terrorism is breeding in these camps. And that's why a lot of the times when anything like this happens, when there's any security issues, they're always the first ones who get attacked. They're always the first ones who get scrutinized. They're always the first ones who basically get pressurized and bullied. And a lot of the times they get physically hurt, whether they're beaten or arrested or anything else like that, in their probing or in their investigations. So yes, it's a voluntary repatriation. It's only if you say yes, but you can say that you said yes, but you could have been forced to say yes. You could have been bullied, you could have been intimidated, you could have been, anything else can happen where they basically make it look like you are saying yes voluntarily, but at the same time, you're not, because you'd much rather stay, because you know the system, so you know what you're doing. Whereas other people are quite happy to go back. I mean, there was an example of a young girl who had finished her education while she was in one of the refugee camps, and she then said, okay, I'd want to go back to the country, but what I'm seeing on the media is that it isn't safe. It is, every few days there's always some sort of explosion, or there's some killing, and you think to yourself, okay, if you can't even protect, for example, the two judges that were killed in the last few weeks, all those innocent people who are dying, the MP who a few days ago obviously passed away as well because a bomb was put under his car. These are the public individuals, and the individual rights of the private citizens are also not being protected. So why would they want to go back to that? Whereas if right now where they are, it's not good at all, but it seems to be a better alternative than where they're going back to. So the repatriation itself, I think to myself, you know what, no, this can be done better. This, as you said, it needs to be a phased approach. I think they want to do a phased approach over the next 3 years, but I don't think we're ready yet. I don't think this whole call, it's more of a It's more of a political decision. I don't think it's a decision that's in the best interest of the Somali people or the refugees themselves, but it's a political decision that makes both countries look better. It makes the UNHCR look good because they're the ones who seem to be negotiating this deal and facilitating it. And I think to myself, we need to just step away from politics. We need to step away from political decisions being made purely for the reason of politics, and political decisions should be made for the benefit or in the best interest of the Somali people themselves. So it needs to be done a little bit later. I don't agree with how it's being done right now. But that's it sort of for now. We'll catch you guys after the break, and obviously stay tuned. Thank you. Welcome back. You're here at the briefing room. My name is Awawa Hamza. I'm your host, and with me is my co-host Samira. Samira, what do you have for us to look at next?
Now, this is a story we've been following for the last couple of weeks. Somalia's parliament has finally ousted Prime Minister Abdi Farah Shirdon in a vote of no confidence. The Prime Minister of the Horn of Africa nation for just over a year lost the confidence vote in Parliament after he resisted President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud's demand that he resign. Unfortunately, legislators said Mahmoud and Shirdon had differed over the composition of a new cabinet, promoting Monday's no confidence vote. And tensions between the president and the prime minister have been ongoing for a while. I mean, we've been hearing these reports over the last few months. Shirdon had claimed that this dispute with the president had been a constitutional one. What are your thoughts, Hamza?
Well, it's difficult because the constitution itself, on some parts, is very clear. It says the president appoints the prime minister, and the prime minister then appoints and chooses his cabinet and the cabinet ministers. Now, a reshuffle is going on. And for a while now, it's always kind of been said that even though we have a prime minister in charge of a cabinet, it was always kind of like, who has control over the functioning government? Who is in charge of the government? And if you look at things constitutionally, it should be the prime minister. But then at the same time, we have a president, and the president, obviously the commander-in-chief. So he's the one who's also in charge of the military, as well as the government itself. And I think this whole confusion, even though it says that the constitution is quite clear on certain parts of this, the only way that we're going to be able to move forward and ensure that this doesn't happen again, and this has happened a few times now over the past few years, obviously with transitional federal governments in the past, where we had previous prime ministers who have had to step down because of certain issues or tensions that have arisen between the prime minister and one of the presidents. But the only way that we're going to be able to move forward is to either say, okay, you know what, we're going to have a parliamentary system where we have a prime minister and we can then have a deputy prime minister and then obviously the rest of the government, or we are going to go with, no, we're going to have a president and a vice president, and then we're going to have the rest of the government. This whole combination thing between a prime minister and a president, both being in government itself, it doesn't work. One of them needs to be in charge. And right now, it is not very clear who needs to be in charge of a government. So this combination of the two really isn't working. And as time goes on, it will just continue over and over again, causing tensions between people who might disagree on a certain point. And the moment they disagree, you get to a point where you say, okay, fine, one of them has to step down. And it's highly unlikely that the president will be asked to step down because he's going to be the public face of the country itself. So the prime minister will always lose out. And this is going to be the thing with the new prime minister that's going to come and step in. I mean, Shirdon is still in his job right now. He had another 30 days to ensure, obviously, that a new prime minister would be selected. And this is obviously, again, the prime minister has to be selected and not elected out of this. So this is another thing when we're going toward 2016. Should everything go right and there'll be no problems and everyone has one man, one vote, some way, somehow, who do you choose to be in charge of the nation? It's when you're voting, you tend to vote, okay, fine, this person is going to be my prime minister, he's going to be in charge, or do you vote for, this person is going to be my president and he's going to be in charge? And for a long time, we've had this whole prime minister, president balance of power sharing, where one had to be of one tribe and the other one had to be, if one was of one tribe, the other one had to be the other tribe. And if it's vice versa, then it had to be the other way around. And I think to myself, this is not healthy for any form of governance. It's not healthy for anything that we want to do. And fine, I like the way he handled. I like the way the Prime Minister Shirdon handled it, where he said, okay, I'm not happy that I'm not able to state my case. And the arguments for that was that if he wanted to be able to state his case, he was the one who should have then put forward a motion of confidence And then he was able to obviously argue his case, and then people could go and agree with him. But because he wasn't the first one to do that, a motion of no confidence was set against him, and then that was the argument for why they denied him to obviously state his case. So he wasn't happy about that. He wasn't able to defend himself and explain anything that he was doing. So, but aside from that, he did say, okay, fine, you know what, I will go with anything that the actual MPs decide. If the MPs decide they don't want to get rid of me, then I will go. If they say that they want to keep me, then I will stay. And it has come out, obviously, that fine, the majority voted to actually kick him out. And because they've now kicked him out, he said, okay, I will accept their decision. I'm not happy with it, but I'll accept their decision. And that in itself is a feat that so far hasn't happened before. There's no violence, there's no rioting, there's no real big problems that have come out of this aside from him losing his job. And you think to yourself, you know, he has handled that really well. He's handled that and allowed the democratic process to actually go on and take place. And it formed a decision. The decision how it was formed, there are doubts about. How this whole process went, there are doubts about. But some way, somehow, obviously, it was still a democratic process, and he decided to agree with what democracy decides. And that I respect him for. I really, really do. I was a little bit disappointed. I was a little bit disappointed about how everything went. But I was also disappointed about how he seemed to have very little to no support from a lot of the people that you would expect to at least get support from. Because what happens is, fair enough, the new reshuffle was going to come on. But with the new reshuffle, obviously, he gets to choose either keep some of the current ministers or he gets to appoint new ones. But if the Prime Minister loses his job, it means that everyone in that cabinet loses their job, because if a new Prime Minister comes, the new Prime Minister gets to choose a new cabinet. So you automatically lose your job. Now, over the last few months, there have been obviously several meetings where a lot of the ministers actually didn't attend the meetings. You have, I think it was like nearly sort of 6 or 7 out of the whole cabinet meetings, so about 60, 70%, just didn't attend the minister meetings anymore because out of protest or what it was that they disagreed with. But nobody was there to support him. And on the day those days that the debates were happening and when the actual final decision was being made, you had people who were supposed to be stakeholders in this process and supposed to be quite interested in the outcome of this process. And one of the allegations that were made was, for example, that the Deputy Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister herself was just in Belgium. And yes, she was there on a business trip, but at that particular time, she was just posting pictures and seems to just sort of thoroughly enjoying her trip and herself. And you obviously have Nicholas Kay as well, who again is one of the stakeholders of the process itself. Obviously, he's the representative towards Somalia, and he was just obviously just talking about some other things. And really and truly, wasn't, aside from being briefed on what was happening, wasn't actually there to sort of look over how things were going. And there are many others who basically it just didn't bother them, and that's how it came across.
But do you think that's because it was something that was so inevitable? People had expected this. It's something that people had been talking about. I mean, the Prime Minister no doubt had ruffled a lot of feathers and upset quite a few people and had broken a lot of bridges, some would say. So was this something that was expected and people were kind of moving on, or do you think it's just a lack of professionalism from stakeholders travelling around, not really paying too much attention to this?
Well, I don't know. It's one of those things where I think to myself, can even though this was probably inevitable, should those people, those stakeholders who are involved, who are supposed to be quite involved in the process, should they still not be present? If not just for appearance's sake, to at least show their face. It's one of those things where I think to myself, okay, regardless of what's going to happen, you're still supposed to be there, because if he loses his job, then you lose your job, or something else will change, and the dynamics are going to change. And that in itself is something that's extremely important that you need to be able to be present for.
Right, and now moving forward, obviously this is a constitutional issue. Something is deeply flawed here. Replacing Shardon with somebody else will most likely end up in the same situation as this, or there will definitely be challenges ahead. How do you think the next steps should play out?
Well, this is the thing. I was making that same argument a little bit earlier, where I said that the constitution itself needs to change. There's no way we can continue to have a prime minister or a president and then think, oh wow, okay, this is never going to happen again. Parts of the constitution needs to obviously be changed, where it says, okay, fine, we will have a president or we will have a prime minister, and this is the state of governance that we're going to have. And this obviously ties into the bigger picture of what type of governance are we going to have. Yes, It seems obviously that it's this federal system that has been agreed upon, but it's never been discussed. And it's never really been debated, and the pros and cons looked at, and if we're going to have a federal system, what type of federal system is it going to be? It's that as a whole section and many other sections of the Constitution that need to be looked at. But no matter what issue will come up, it will always be a constitutional one, because if ever you want to solve a dispute, you go back to the Constitution, and if the Constitution doesn't then isn't very clear in helping you settle that dispute, then you have got nothing further to go on, because you haven't been able to actually use or come up with a Constitution that does clearly state what you can and can't do. So moving forward, it's honestly the first steps that should be taken is to change the style of governance. It's not going to be quick. It's not going to be easy. Most people will disagree about it, but in my opinion, that's the only way that we're going to be able to move forward. So that's probably what we're going to need to do.
Right.
But that's all we had time for now. Thank you for watching the briefing this evening. My name is Hamza. I've been your host, and with me is my co-host Samira Ahmed, and I hope to catch you guys next time. It was fun.
Good job, baby.
It was okay.
Yeah,
I like how we did that.
yes.
I really need to scratch my nose.